"Walk away," Ford said. Trent stared at him. 30 people in that hallway. Every single one of them went quiet. Trent's hand shot out, hard, certain, aimed straight at Reagan's shoulder. But Reagan wasn't there anymore. No sound, no stumble, no reaction. She was simply gone from the place he aimed at. And in under 2 seconds, Trent stood there with his arm extended into empty air, face burning red, in front of 30 witnesses who saw everything. This wasn't the first time Shane Whitfield had done this, and it wasn't the first time someone had stayed silent and quietly disappeared from this campus with no explanation. The last kid transferred out by October. But Reagan Holloway didn't come from a place where people quit. She came off a Greyhound bus with a worn duffel bag and 11 years of 5 a.m. mornings that nobody knew about yet. And for 3 weeks, she had been building something. There's a kind of quiet that's hard to explain. Not the quiet of someone who has nothing to say, the quiet of someone who has learned, the hard way, that most things don't need to be said out loud. You've met people like that, maybe, once or twice in your life. People who walk into a room and don't announce themselves. Don't look around for approval. Don't check to see who's watching. They just arrive. And something about the way they carry themselves tells you, without a single word, that this person has been through something, that they've earned whatever peace they've found inside themselves. Reagan Holloway was 18 years old the first time she stepped foot on the campus of Caldwell College. She came on a Greyhound bus from Harlan County, West Virginia. 11 hours, 2 transfers, 1 paper bag with a sandwich her father had made at 4 in the morning. She didn't have a car. She didn't have anyone dropping her off. She didn't have a phone case with stickers on it or a brand new backpack from Target or a mother standing on the curb taking pictures. She had a duffel bag, worn at the seams, army green, and tied to the outside of that bag, looped through the strap with a piece of paracord, was a pair of Taekwondo training gloves, old ones. The knuckle padding was split on the left hand. The Velcro on the right wrist strap had been re-sewn so many times the thread was a different color than the original. The black dye had faded to a dull gray on the fingers. They looked like something you'd find at a yard sale, something you'd price at 50 cents and not feel bad about. But Reagan Holloway had worn those gloves for 11 years. She stepped off the bus at 6:42 in the morning. The campus was quiet, mist sitting low on the grass, a few lights on in the administration building, a maintenance man with a leaf blower in the distance, not yet running it, just standing there drinking coffee. Reagan stood at the edge of the parking lot. She didn't pull out of a campus map, didn't check her phone. She just looked slowly, deliberately. The way someone looks at a place when they're not just seeing it, they're reading it. The layout of the buildings, the sight lines, where the light fell and where it didn't. Which paths were worn into the grass by foot traffic, which ones were official walkways that nobody actually used. The maintenance man noticed her standing there. He gave a small nod. She nodded back. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the dormitory. Now, I want to tell you something about where Reagan came from, because it matters. It matters a lot. Harlan County, Kentucky, well, West Virginia border country, that whole region, it is beautiful. Don't let anyone tell you different. Those mountains have a kind of dignity to them that you don't find in a lot of places. The trees go on forever. The rivers run cold and clear in the morning. But it is also a place that has been forgotten by a lot of the people who were supposed to remember it. The coal industry had been dying since before Reagan was born. Her father, Dennis Holloway, had worked the mines for 19 years. Good work, honest work, the kind of work that a man is proud of even when it's hard. Then came the accident. Reagan was 11 years old. Dennis Holloway came home from the mine with 2 broken ribs, a compressed vertebra, and a left hand that never quite closed all the way again. He was out of work for 8 months. Then the company restructured. Then the mine closed. He found other work, odd jobs, fix-it work. Driving for a while, until his back made that too hard. He never complained. That's the thing about Dennis Holloway that you need to understand. Not once, not in all the years Reagan could remember, did that man sit down at the kitchen table and say life wasn't fair. He just kept going, and he raised his daughter to do the same. Reagan's mother had passed when Reagan was 9. Breast cancer went fast, which people said was a mercy, though Reagan was never entirely sure that was the right word for it. What she remembered most about her mother wasn't the sickness. It was the Sunday mornings. Her mother singing in the kitchen, not well. Nobody would have called her a singer, but with a kind of full-throated happiness that made the whole house feel bigger. After she was gone, the kitchen was very quiet on Sundays. Reagan was 7 years old when she walked into Ray Dunbar's gym for the first time. It wasn't much of a gym, a converted storage unit on the edge of town. Rubber floor mats, a heavy bag hanging from a chain, fluorescent lights that buzzed when the temperature dropped, no heat in the winter, no air conditioning in the summer. Ray Dunbar was 51 years old then. He'd been coaching Taekwondo in Harlan County for 20 years, teaching kids who mostly had nowhere else to go after school. He didn't recruit, didn't advertise. Word got around. Reagan's father brought her one Saturday morning after she'd gotten into her third fight at school. Not because she was a bully, the opposite. She kept defending other kids and then not knowing when to stop. Dennis Holloway sat in a plastic chair in the corner and watched his daughter go through her first hour with Coach Dunbar. At the end of it, Ray came and sat next to him. "She's got something," Ray said. "I know," Dennis said. "I just need somewhere to put it." So she came back every week, then twice a week, then 4 days a week and Saturday mornings. For 11 years, Ray Dunbar never charged full price. He never said that out loud. He just always seemed to have the math come out a little different when the Holloways paid. Dennis never mentioned it. Reagan figured it out around 18 and never mentioned it either. Some gifts are best received without making a fuss. By the time Reagan was 16, she was competing at the regional level. By 17, she had won 3 Appalachian Regional Championships and a bronze medal at the Junior Nationals. There was a short piece about her on ESPN Regional. 23 seconds. The anchor called her Coal Country's quiet champion. Coach Dunbar had recorded it on his phone. Watched it so many times the video had a worn path in the data. When Caldwell College offered Reagan a full athletic scholarship in Taekwondo, full tuition, room, board. Dennis Holloway sat at that kitchen table and read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it very carefully, set it down, and didn't say anything for a while. Reagan watched him from across the table. Finally, he looked up. "Your mama would have made a lot of noise about this," he said. Reagan said, "I know. I'm going to make it on her behalf then." He took a breath. "We're going to celebrate tonight." They had dinner at the diner on Route 38. Dennis ordered the chicken fried steak, which he almost never did because of the price. Reagan had the same. It was the best meal she ever ate. The scholarship had one condition. Standard language buried in paragraph 4 of the agreement. The recipient must maintain a minimum GPA of 2.8 and must not receive any formal disciplinary action during the academic year in which the scholarship is active. One disciplinary action. That's all it would take. Reagan had read that paragraph carefully. She understood what it meant. Coach Dunbar had understood it too. When he called her the week before she left, "You know how to fight," he said. "That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about someone knowing that and using it against you." "What do you mean?" Reagan asked. "People see a girl who can fight, they're going to try to get you to fight when you shouldn't. Make it look like you started it. Make it look like you're the problem. You understand what I'm saying?" She was quiet for a moment. "Don't fight the fight they want," she said. "Fight the fight you're ready for," he finished. She'd been hearing that phrase since she was 7 years old. She thought about it on the bus. 11 hours, 2 transfers, 1 paper bag sandwich. She thought about it as she stood in that parking lot in the early morning mist, reading the campus like a map. She'd worked too hard for too long to lose this in the first month. So when the trouble started, and she already knew, somewhere in that quiet part of herself, that trouble was coming, she would wait, she would be patient, she would be ready. Caldwell College had about 2,000 students, small enough that everyone knew everyone's business within a week, large enough that you could disappear if you wanted to. Reagan did not particularly want to disappear, but she also wasn't looking to announce herself. She moved into her dorm room on the 3rd floor of Carver Hall. Her roommate wasn't there yet. Reagan chose the bed by the window, not for the view, but because she'd have her back to the wall and could see the door. Old habit. Ray Dunbar had spent years teaching her to always know where the exits were. She unpacked in 40 minutes, made the bed with military corners the way her father had taught her, put her books on the desk in the order she'd used them, hung her training schedule on the wall next to the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and was very quiet for a few minutes. This was a thing she did. Before competitions, before hard conversations, before anything that mattered, just a few minutes of stillness, letting the world settle around her. Then she got up and went to find the cafeteria. The cafeteria at Caldwell College was called Founders Hall, which was a grand name for a room with drop ceilings and linoleum floors and a salad bar that had seen better days. But it had big windows on the south side, and at 11:30 in the morning, with the autumn sun coming through those windows, it wasn't bad. Reagan got her tray. scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. She was watching her weight class for the upcoming competition, but she had some room to work with. She picked up a coffee. Black. She scanned the room. It was already about half full. First day, so people were still figuring out the social geography. Where to sit, who to sit with, all the invisible negotiations that happen in the first week of any new place. There was one table that was already clearly established, center of the room, best light, farthest from the kitchen noise. 8 chairs, 6 of them occupied by people who clearly had not just arrived, who had been here before and returned with a sense of ownership. At the head of that table sat a young man who had the kind of presence that's hard to look away from. Tall, blonde. The specific kind of blonde that costs money to maintain. He was wearing a cashmere sweater in October, pale blue, and the fact that he was warm enough in it while everyone else was still in hoodies told you something about his thermostat and someone else's credit card. His name was Shane Whitfield. Reagan didn't know that yet. She just saw a table with 2 empty chairs, reasonable distance from the noise. Good sightline to the exit. She walked over and sat down. The conversation at the table didn't stop immediately, but it slowed. The way a song slows when someone walks into the room and changes the feeling. The young man in the blue sweater, Shane, looked at Reagan, not a rude look. Not yet. Just the look of someone assessing an unexpected variable. He took in the duffel bag on Reagan's shoulder, the worn jacket, the old training gloves tied to the outside of the bag. Then he smiled. The specific kind of smile that isn't actually friendly. "Hey there," Shane said. "You new?" "Yes," Reagan said. She put her tray down and started eating. Shane watched her for a moment. A beat passed. Then another. "This is actually our table," Shane said pleasantly. "We kind of have a thing going on here." Reagan looked up. She looked at the table. Then she looked at Shane, not with defiance, not with fear, with a kind of clear, steady attention that said, "I heard you. I'm considering what you said. I haven't yet decided it requires a response." Then she went back to her eggs. The table went quiet. Shane's friends, Pierce, who sat to his left, and Derek, who sat to his right, both looked at Shane to see what would happen. Shane's close friend, Ford Beckett, was sitting 2 chairs down. He was a large young man who used his size the way some men do, as a kind of ambient suggestion. He shifted in his chair and looked at Reagan with the particular expression of someone who isn't sure whether to be amused or offended. Shane tried again. Still pleasant. "Still smiling? I don't think you understood me." "I understood you fine," Reagan said. She didn't look up. "There are empty chairs. I'm using one. I'm not bothering anyone." The smile tightened. A moment passed. Then Pierce, sitting to Shane's left, reached out and, with the deliberate casualness of someone executing a plan they're pretending is an accident, knocked over a cup of orange juice. It went across the table, right across Reagan's tray, soaked her toast, got into her eggs, ran across the edge of the tray and dripped onto her jacket. Pierce gasped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The cafeteria around them had gone quiet. Not silent, there were still 100 other conversations, but the tables nearest to them had tuned in. People watching, waiting. Reagan looked down at her tray. She looked at the orange juice running across the tray's edge. She picked up her coffee cup first, the one thing that hadn't been hit, and moved it to the far corner of the tray. Then she looked up. She looked at Pierce, at Shane, at the table. And then she did something nobody expected. She didn't say a word. She stood up, picked up her tray with both hands, carried it to the tray return, came back, wiped down the part of the table she'd been sitting at with a napkin, picked up her duffel bag. Then she walked to the cafeteria line, got a fresh tray, new eggs, new toast, new orange juice, came back to the room, and sat down at a different table, alone by the window, and ate her breakfast. The table where Shane sat was still quiet. Shane was watching Reagan from across the room. Something had shifted in his expression. The smile was gone. It had been replaced by something more careful. He had expected a reaction. Anger, tears, embarrassment. Any of those would have been satisfying and would have fit the script he was used to. He had not expected to be ignored. Ford leaned over and said something quietly to Shane. He didn't respond. He was still watching Reagan, who was eating her eggs by the window and looking out at the campus as though nothing in the world had happened. Later, Reagan would think about that morning and what it had cost her. Not to say something, not to push back, not to let the anger she'd absolutely felt, because she had felt it, hot and immediate, the moment that orange juice hit her tray. Show on her face, it had cost something. But Ray Dunbar had spent 11 years teaching her that the first rule of any confrontation is, control yourself before you try to control anything else. You cannot make a good decision when your blood is up. You cannot see clearly when you're responding to pride instead of reality. The fighter who moves first out of anger almost always moves wrong. So she'd sat by the window and eaten her breakfast and looked out at the autumn campus. And she'd filed away everything she'd seen, the table, the dynamic, the way the guy in the blue sweater worked, pleasant on the surface, delegation underneath, the way the others watched him for cues, the way Ford had shifted in his chair but not actually done anything. She filed it all away. Carefully, the way you file away information that you don't yet know how you'll need. Reagan's first class at Caldwell College was Introduction to Sociology, Room 214, Whitmore Hall, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 9 to 10:30. She got there early, as she did for everything, and took a seat in the third row, slightly to the left, good sight line to the board. Not the front row, which was too visible. Not the back, which was too easy to disappear in. The room filled up around her. Then Shane Whitfield walked in, with Pierce and Derek. Reagan watched them find seats, back right corner, which made sense for people who preferred to watch a room rather than participate in it. Shane glanced at Reagan as he passed, a small glance. Measuring, Reagan looked at her notebook. The professor came in at exactly 9 o'clock. She was a woman in her mid-60s, compact, silver hair cut short and practical. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, which she put on and took off with great frequency throughout the class, as though the world was constantly shifting between two focal lengths. Her name, written on the board in no-nonsense block letters, was Dr. Norma Gale. She did not do a lot of warm-up. Sociology, she said, dropping a stack of syllabi on the front desk without breaking stride, is the study of why people do what they do when they're around other people. Which sounds simple. It is not simple. It is, in fact, the most complicated thing there is, because most people, when they're around other people, have absolutely no idea why they're doing what they're doing. They think they do. They would bet money on it. They are almost always wrong. She looked around the room. By the end of this semester, you will be a little harder to fool. That includes being harder to fool by yourself. That part tends to make people uncomfortable. That's fine. Discomfort is where learning lives. She picked up the syllabi and started distributing them. Reagan liked her immediately. The class was good, dense, but good. Dr. Gale had a way of moving between theory and example that kept you engaged. She'd reference a sociological concept and then immediately ground it in something so specific and recognizable that you forgot you were in a classroom for a moment. Shane and his friends were quiet during class. Present but not engaged. The kind of students who were there because the credit was required, not because they wanted to be. At 10:30, Dr. Gale said, "That's time. Read chapter 1 before Thursday. Bring questions. Real ones, not the kind designed to show me you read it." Students gathered their things and filed out. Reagan was just putting her notebook into her bag when she heard her name. "Ms. Holloway." She looked up. Dr. Gale was standing at the front of the room, putting her own notes away with methodical efficiency. She hadn't looked up. "A moment, if you don't mind." Reagan waited as the room emptied. Shane and his friends left without looking back. When the room was empty, Dr. Gale finally looked up. She studied Reagan for a moment with the calm, interested gaze of someone who has spent decades professionally observing people. "How long have you been training?" she asked. Reagan blinked. "Since I was 7. "How did you know?" Dr. Gale pulled up a chair across from Reagan's desk and sat down with the directness of someone who didn't see the point in standing when you could sit. "The way you held your tray this morning," she said. "In the cafeteria." Reagan went very still. "I have a classroom across from Founders Hall," Dr. Gale said calmly. "I eat breakfast at my desk most mornings. The window overlooks the south entrance to the cafeteria. I happened to be looking up when that orange juice went across your tray." She said it simply, not dramatically. "Just, this is what I saw. Most people, when something is thrown at them, even something minor, even something that's technically an accident, they flinch, they pull back. Their center of gravity goes high." She paused. "You didn't flinch. When that juice hit the tray, your grip adjusted. Your weight didn't shift. You protected your base, and then you made a decision. That's not a natural response. That's trained." Reagan looked at her. "Said nothing." "Taekwondo," Dr. Gale said. It wasn't a question, or something similar. "But I'd guess Taekwondo based on the scholarship list. You read the scholarship list every year. It's public record." A slight pause. "I also want to say, because it seems relevant, that what I watched this morning in that cafeteria took more discipline than most adults I know would have managed. You're 18 years old. That young man knocked your food over in front of a room full of people, and you said nothing, did nothing to escalate. Just moved on. She let that sit for a moment. "That tells me something about you," she said. "And I want you to know that I saw it. Because I suspect the next few weeks are going to require you to keep doing hard things, and it helps sometimes to know that someone in the room is actually paying attention." Reagan looked at this woman, 60-some years old, silver-haired, direct as a north wind, and felt something shift slightly in the tightly wound center of herself. "Not much, but something. Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Dr. Gale said. She stood up, adjusted her reading glasses. "I've been teaching at this college for 19 years. I know how Caldwell works, and I know what that young man's family represents to this institution." "So," she looked at Reagan steadily, "whatever you're planning, and I can see that you're planning something, even if it's just planning to be patient, document everything. Write it down. Dates, times, exactly what was said and by whom. Old habit of mine from a long time ago." "What kind of habit?" Reagan asked. Dr. Gale permitted herself a small smile. "The kind that carries a story too long to tell right now. The kind you develop when you spend a summer as a civil rights observer in Georgia in 1983, she said. "And you learn that the truth almost always exists. It just needs enough paper to stand on." She gathered her bag and walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused. "Thursday, Miss Holloway." "Bring questions," then she was gone. Reagan sat alone in the empty classroom for a moment. She took out her notebook, not the class notebook. A smaller one she kept in the front pocket of her bag. She wrote down the date and time. She wrote down what had happened in the cafeteria, what Pierce had said, what Shane had and hadn't said. Then she wrote down what Dr. Gale had told her. Document everything. She clicked her pen. Yeah, she'd been planning to. By the end of the first week, Reagan understood the shape of what she was dealing with. Her roommate, Delia Marsh, was part of it. Not because Delia had told her anything directly, but because Delia talked, freely and frequently, and with the cheerful candor of someone who didn't quite realize how much information they were giving out at any given time. Reagan liked Delia. A lot, actually. She was funny and warm and aggressively honest about her own flaws in a way that made it easy to trust her. Delia was from Louisville, pre-nursing. First in her family to go to a 4-year college. She had a poster of Dolly Parton on her side of the room, and a collection of houseplants on the windowsill that she talked to in the evenings. "Does that work?" Reagan had asked once, watching Delia murmur something to a small pothos. "Can't hurt," Delia had said, completely seriously. Through Delia, and through her own observation, Reagan had put together a fairly complete picture of Shane Whitfield within 6 days. Shane was 20 years old, sophomore. He had been at Caldwell since last year, and in that time he had established a social architecture that was, Reagan had to admit, genuinely impressive in its efficiency. He never did the obvious things himself. He didn't spread rumors directly. He asked questions that implied the rumors and let other people fill in the blanks. He didn't threaten anyone. He just made very clear, through the management of access and inclusion, what the cost of disloyalty was. He didn't bully publicly. He created situations in which someone else could do it while he watched from a comfortable distance. It was, in sociological terms, and Reagan was now reading ahead in Dr. Gale's textbook, a textbook example of indirect aggression, social control through the management of belonging. Reagan had seen it before. Not on this scale, but the basic shape of she recognized. There was always someone like this, in her high school, in her gym briefly, before Ray Dunbar sorted it out in about 48 hours. The mechanism was always the same. Make people afraid of being left out, and you never have to be openly cruel. They'll police themselves. What was different about Shane was what was behind him. His father was Senator Richard Whitfield of Kentucky. State Senate, not federal, but in a state like Kentucky. A state senator from the right family in the right district had a very long reach into very local things. School boards, college funding committees, scholarship review panels. Delia mentioned this on Wednesday evening, as casually as she'd mentioned the weather. His dad basically bought the new science wing, Delia said, not looking up from her textbook, last year. There's a plaque and everything, Reagan kept reading. So the school's kind of. Delia tilted her head, you know. They're careful with him. What do you mean, careful, like? If there's a complaint or whatever. Delia turned a page. Things tend to get handled in a certain way. Reagan looked up at the ceiling for a moment. This was the part Ray Dunbar had warned her about. Not the Shane part, the system part. The part where the person who can hurt you most isn't the one in front of you. It's the structure of relationships and money and quiet agreements that stands behind them. Has anyone ever actually pushed back on him? Reagan asked. Delia thought about it. Last year, she said slowly. There was a guy in the business program who filed a complaint about something he did. I don't know the whole story, but he transferred out by October, she said it without drama. Just as a fact, the way you report a weather pattern you've learned to plan around. Reagan went back to her reading, but she was listening on Thursday. In Dr. Gale's class, they discussed Robert Merton's theory of social structures and anomie. The idea that when the legitimate means of achieving something are blocked, people find other means. Dr. Gale, at one point, looked around the room and asked, "Can anyone give me a contemporary example of a social structure that maintains itself through the threat of exclusion rather than through actual force?" Several students offered examples: friend groups, online communities, workplaces. Shane, in the back corner, was on his phone. Reagan said, "Any institution where a small group controls access to resources that the larger group needs." Dr. Gale looked at her. "Just for a moment." "Say more," she said. "If the resource is belonging, social access, reputation, safety, and one person or one family controls access to that resource, then you don't need overt coercion. The threat is implied. People regulate themselves, and what's the effect on the larger group?" Dr. Gale asked. "Self-silencing," Reagan said. "People stop reporting, stop pushing back. They internalize the cost-benefit analysis and conclude that it's not worth it. And what breaks that pattern?" Reagan considered. "When someone arrives who doesn't need the resource," she said, "someone who's not trying to belong to that particular group. They don't have anything to lose. So the threat doesn't work on them." Dr. Gale held her gaze for a moment. "That," she said to the whole class, "is chapter 5. Most of you won't read it until next month." Ms. Holloway apparently got there already. From the back corner, without looking up from his phone, Shane said, "Or maybe she just thinks she doesn't have anything to lose." The class went quiet for a half-second. Dr. Gale didn't blink. "That," she said pleasantly, "is a distinction worth examining." Thursday week, she moved on. Reagan wrote down the date and what Shane had said, exactly as Dr. Gale had told her. By the end of the first week, the campaign was clear. Shane didn't confront Reagan again directly after the cafeteria. He didn't need to. The rumors started on Wednesday. By Friday, Reagan heard from Delia that there was a story going around that Reagan had received her scholarship through a special program, the implication being that the standards had been lowered, that she didn't really belong there academically, that her presence was a kind of charity. 3 people who'd initially been friendly to Reagan sat near her in class, exchanged small talk in the hallway, had quietly pulled back. One of them had told Delia apologetically that they just didn't want the drama. Reagan noted all of it. She didn't confront anyone, didn't go to the administration, didn't post anything, didn't vent to Delia at length, though Delia offered the ear. She just watched and waited, and kept her schedule: training at 5 in the morning, classes, study, training in the evening, bed. She called Coach Dunbar on Friday night. "How's the campus?" he asked. "Managed," she said. A pause. "Anyone giving you trouble?" "Early days," she said. "You training every morning, evening when I can get the gym. Competitions in 34 days, I know." Another pause. The comfortable kind. Ray Dunbar was a man who didn't fill silences just to fill them. "You remember what your daddy said?" he said finally. It wasn't a question. Reagan looked out the dorm window at the campus in the evening light. Dark hills beyond the buildings. Looked a little like home. "Not exactly, but a little. Don't fight the fight they want," she said. "Fight the fight you're ready for. 34 days, he said again. "I'll be ready." She would be. Delia Marsh was not a morning person. She had made this very clear from the first night. She slept with an eye mask and 2 pillows and a white noise machine, and she had extracted a solemn agreement from Reagan in the first 24 hours that the overhead light would not be turned on before 7 a.m. Reagan had agreed without any difficulty. She was usually gone by 5. On the Saturday of the second week, Delia woke up at 4:50 in the morning with a pounding headache that she would later diagnose accurately as the result of staying up until 2 studying and not drinking enough water. She lay in the dark for a few minutes trying to will herself back to sleep. It didn't work. She noticed that Reagan's bed was empty, which was not unusual. Reagan was always up early, always somewhere else. Delia had stopped registering it, but the headache was bad, and she needed water, and the water in the bathroom on their floor tasted wrong, and she'd discovered last week that the water fountain on the ground floor, near the gym entrance, was somehow better. Colder, maybe the pipes. She didn't know. She put on her robe and her slippers and shuffled downstairs. The ground floor of Carver Hall was quiet and slightly weird at 5 in the morning. The fluorescent light in the stairwell buzzed. Someone had left a pizza box by the elevator. The common room was dark except for the glow of a soda machine. Delia went to the water fountain, drank, felt marginally better. She was on her way back to the stairs when she heard it. Sound from the gym, not music, not the thud of a basketball or the clank of weights, something more regular than that, more rhythmic. The sound of movement, quick and controlled, interspersed with sharp exhalations of breath. Delia stopped. She looked at the gym door, which was propped open slightly. She stood there for a moment, having an internal debate about minding her own business, which she lost. She walked over, looked through the gap in the door. Reagan was alone in the gymnasium. The lights were low. Only half the overheads were on, casting the space in a yellowish half-light. The floor was empty. Reagan had set up in the center of the room, near the hanging heavy bag. She was in training clothes, no shoes, bare feet on the rubber mat. She was moving. Delia had no vocabulary for what she was seeing. She didn't know the names of the techniques, didn't know the philosophy behind the sequence, didn't have any framework for understanding it technically. What she understood was this: it was beautiful, not in a performance sense, not showy, not dramatic. Beautiful the way something is beautiful when it has been done 10,000 times until every inefficiency is gone. When a thing has been refined past the point where you can see the effort anymore and what's left is just the thing itself. Reagan moved through a sequence of kicks, high, precise, snapping out and returning. She pivoted, changed angle, a spinning motion that seemed to defy the expected relationship between rotation and balance. She landed and there was no sound. She absorbed the movement rather than letting it dissipate into the floor. She went to the heavy bag, hit it, not wildly, not hard for the sake of hard, with a series of strikes that made the bag travel the same distances and return to the same position each time, like a metronome. Then she stopped, stood still, breathed, just breathed. For maybe 30 seconds, then she started again. Delia watched for, she didn't know how long. 5 minutes? 10? She must track what she felt standing in the doorway in her robe and slippers with her water fountain headache was something she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe. But more than that, something like, oh, I see. I thought I understood who was living in the other bed in my room. I did not understand. I had no idea. Eventually, Delia backed away from the door quietly and went back upstairs. She lay in her bed. The headache was fading. She thought about what she'd just seen. She thought about the cafeteria and the orange juice and how Reagan had said nothing. Had just moved to another table. She thought about the rumors going around. That Reagan was there on a charity case, that she didn't really belong. And she thought, those people have no idea what is in this building. She fell asleep thinking that. And in the morning, when Reagan came back from the gym at 7 with her hair damp and her face calm, Delia looked at her over the rim of her coffee mug. For a long moment, I got up for water last night, Delia said. Reagan poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the desk. I know, she said. I heard you in the hall. Delia looked at her. How long do you train in the morning? Hour and a half. Sometimes 2. Every day? Every day. Delia wrapped both hands around her mug. Reagan, she said. Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on with that Whitfield guy. And I don't know what you're planning. A pause. But for the record, I'm on your side. Reagan looked at her. Something quiet moved across her face. Not surprise, exactly, but something close to it. The expression of someone who had learned to expect very little and was being offered more. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Delia said. Just let me know if you need anything. She took a sip of her coffee. Also, she added, whatever you were doing in that gym at 5 in the morning, that was incredible. I don't know what it was, but it was incredible. Reagan looked out the window for a moment. It's what I have, she said simply. She said it without drama, without pride or apology, just, this is mine. This is what I am. Delia nodded. Outside, the autumn morning was coming up gold over the Kentucky hills. The campus was just beginning to wake. Somewhere across the quad, a door opened and closed. 33 days until the regional championship. The trouble hadn't really started yet, but it was coming, and in a dorm room on the 3rd floor of Carver Hall. A girl from Harlan County drank her water and watched the morning arrive. She was ready. 33 days. That number sat in the back of Reagan's mind like a quiet clock. Not anxious, just present. The way a deadline is present when you respect it enough to keep track. She'd been at Caldwell for 9 days now. In those 9 days, she had learned the layout of every building she needed. The fastest route from Carver Hall to the gym. The professor who locked her classroom early and the one who left it open. The maintenance schedule for the ground floor. Important. because the gym was cleanest and emptiest between 5 and 6:30 in the morning. She had also learned the shape of Shane Whitfield's operation, not completely, but enough. Shane worked in layers. Reagan had started to think of it like an onion, not because it was complex exactly, but because every time you pulled back one layer, there was another one underneath, and the further in you got, the more it stung. The outermost layer was social, the rumors, the withdrawal of access, the invisible tax on anyone who chose to associate with Reagan. That layer had been in place since day 3 and was now running smoothly on its own. Shane didn't have to maintain it actively. The social ecosystem did it for him. The second layer was academic. Reagan had noticed it first in Thursday's sociology class, the small interruptions when she spoke, the whispered exchange between Pierce and Derek timed precisely when Reagan was mid-sentence, designed to break her rhythm without being overt enough to get a reaction from Dr. Gale. Small things, easy to dismiss individually, designed to accumulate. The third layer Reagan didn't fully see yet, but she felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm arrives. Something was being built, something more deliberate than social friction or classroom noise. She wrote all of it down, every evening. Dates, times, what was said, who was present. Dr. Gale had said the truth needs enough paper to stand on. Reagan was building the paper. On Monday of the second week, the campaign moved into the third layer. Reagan found out from Delia. Not because Delia was being dramatic about it. Delia wasn't dramatic by nature. She just came back to the room after dinner and sat on her bed and didn't immediately say anything, which was unusual enough that Reagan looked up from her reading. Something happened, Reagan said. Delia looked at her. Someone filed a complaint with the Academic Integrity Office, she said. About me. Reagan closed her book, saying what? That I submitted work that wasn't my own. Delia's voice was steady. She'd had time to process this on the walk back. Specifically, the first response paper for Intro to Research Methods, which I stayed up until 1 in the morning writing myself. Who filed it? Anonymous. Delia said the word like it had a bad taste. The office doesn't disclose during the initial inquiry stage. Reagan looked at her for a moment. Do you still have the original document? She asked. Yes. Browser history? Search terms, sources you looked up? Delia stared at her. You're asking the right questions very fast. Do you have them? Everything's in my Google Drive. Dated. I write in drafts. There are probably 8 versions with timestamps going back 3 days before the paper was due. Reagan nodded slowly. Don't delete anything, she said. Don't move anything. Don't talk to the Integrity Office without keeping a written record of every conversation. Reagan, Delia's voice was quiet. Is this about me or is this because of you? Reagan didn't look away. I think, she said carefully, that someone figured out you're the person closest to me, and that you have a scholarship with conditions. Delia sat with that for a moment. They're trying to get to you through me, she said. That's what it looks like. Delia was quiet. Then, that is a spectacularly rotten thing to do. Yes, he doesn't even know me. No, Reagan agreed. He doesn't. Delia looked down at her hands. Then she looked up. Okay, she said. What do we do? You do exactly what I said. Preserve everything. Answer formally and in writing. And give me a day. A day for what? Reagan picked her book back up. To think, she said. She trained that evening for 2 hours instead of 1. Not out of anxiety. That wasn't how it worked for her. Physical training was where she went to think clearly. The body occupied, the mind free. Ray Dunbar had explained it to her once in terms she'd never forgotten. The body knows how to handle stress. Give it something concrete to do, and the mind stops spinning and starts working. She worked combinations on the heavy bag. Slow first, then faster. She ran footwork drills until the patterns were automatic. She stretched until the tension in her back released, and she thought the academic complaint against Delia was a calculated escalation. It wasn't random. It required someone who knew Delia had a scholarship with academic conditions, knew how to file an anonymous complaint through official channels, and understood that the investigation alone, regardless of outcome, would cost Delia time, stress, and standing. It was designed to send a message to Reagan without touching Reagan directly. Back off, or the people around you pay. The problem, for Shane, was that Reagan recognized the move. She'd seen it before in a different context. In competition, there was a version of this. A fighter who couldn't beat you directly would try to disrupt your preparation, get in your head, make you fight distracted. The counter wasn't to fight harder. The counter was to stay in your own game. Control what you could control. Don't let someone else's play change your rhythm. She kept training. The clock on the gym wall said 9:47. 31 days. She wasn't backing off. On Tuesday evening, Delia came back to the room with her laptop, and a look on her face that Reagan had not seen before. It was the look of someone who has just discovered they've been living next to something significant without knowing it. She sat down on her bed, opened the laptop, turned it toward Reagan. "I looked you up," she said. Reagan looked at the screen. It was a sports regional website, an article from 11 months ago. Small outlet covering Appalachian athletic programs, the kind of coverage that big cities don't bother with but matters enormously in the communities it's about. The headline read, "Coal Country's Quiet Champion. Harlan Kankte's Regan Holloway takes bronze at Junior Nationals." Below it was a photo. Reagan, 17 years old, standing on a podium with a bronze medal. Not smiling in the big theatrical way, just a small, real smile. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. Next to her in the photo, tall and broad-shouldered with a face like a weather-beaten cliff, was Coach Ray Dunbar. Delia pointed at the screen. 3 regional titles, she said, back to back to back. Bronze at Junior Nationals. And it says here ESPN picked up 23 seconds of footage. Reagan looked at the photo for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "Reagan, yeah. Why didn't you tell anyone?" Reagan looked up at her roommate, considered the question honestly. "Because it's not relevant to most conversations," she said. "And because," she paused, "because in my experience, when people know something like that about you, they stop seeing you. They see the thing instead." Delia stared at her. "That is," Delia said slowly, "the most quietly heartbreaking thing I've heard all week. Don't make it dramatic." "I'm not making it dramatic. It is dramatic." Delia closed the laptop. "Does Shane know?" "He knows I have an athletic scholarship," Reagan said. "He probably knows the sport. Whether he's looked further than that." Reagan shook her head slightly. "I don't think so. I think he looked at me and decided what I was. And stopped looking." Delia was quiet for a moment. "That's a mistake," she said. "Yes," Reagan agreed. "It is." 2 days later, Reagan found out what Shane knew and didn't know. It came through an unlikely source. Ford Beckett, Shane's closest friend, was in Reagan's American History section on Wednesday mornings. She'd noticed him there from the first week, mostly because he was difficult to miss physically, and because he had the specific energy of someone who has always been the largest person in most rooms and hasn't yet figured out whether that's an asset or a liability. He was, Reagan had concluded, not unintelligent. He was performing a role. Shane's large, vaguely intimidating right-hand man. That didn't quite fit him. Like a coat that was the wrong size on Wednesday. He sat down 1 seat away from Reagan. Unusual. He normally sat at the back. He didn't say anything for the first 20 minutes of class. Then, during a transition between topics when the professor was writing on the board, he leaned slightly and said, quietly and without looking at her, "He knows your scholarship has a conduct clause." Reagan didn't move. "He found out through someone in the financial aid office," he said, still not looking at her. "I don't know who. He didn't tell me." A pause. "Why are you telling me this?" Reagan said. Her voice was equally quiet. Ford was quiet for a moment. He picked up his pen and put it down again. "Because he also went after a kid last year," he said, "in the business program. And I didn't say anything then." And he transferred out. He finally glanced at her. "Just for a second, I'm not," he started, stopped. "I'm not going to do anything. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know either." The professor turned back to the room, and Ford straightened up and looked at the board. Reagan looked at her notebook. She wrote down the date and time and exactly what he'd said. Then she thought about Ford Beckett for a moment. 20 years old. Big guy. Shane's closest running mate in this whole operation. He wasn't brave. He'd told her so himself, indirectly. But he was tired of the weight of knowing things and not saying them. She understood that particular weight. She wrote his name down too. Filed it away. You never knew. Thursday evening, 8:15. Reagan was at her desk with her sociology reading when her phone buzzed. Coach Ray Dunbar. Right on schedule. He called every Thursday at 8. He had called every Thursday at 8 for the past 3 years, since she'd started competing at the regional level, and he'd decided that weekly check-ins were part of the training protocol. Not optional, not negotiable. Just Thursday at 8. She picked up. "How's the campus?" he said. "No hello." Ray Dunbar didn't waste time on hellos. "Managed," she said. Pause. "That's a different word than last week. Last week I said managed. Last week you said it different." She set down her highlighter. Ray Dunbar had known her for 11 years. He had watched her compete in 17 regional tournaments, 2 national qualifiers, and 1 junior nationals. He had seen her lose and seen her win, and seen her lose badly and come back. He knew her voice the way a luthier knows a particular instrument. Every resonance, every tension. "Someone came after my roommate," she said. She told him. briefly and in order. The anonymous complaint, the scholarship condition, the timeline. Ray listened without interrupting. That was a thing she'd always valued about him. He let you finish. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. He went around you, he said. Yes, can't get to you directly. So he goes to someone next to you, that's the read. Another pause. She could hear, faintly, the background sounds of his gym, the place where she'd spent more of her childhood than anywhere except her own house. The buzz of those fluorescent lights. Probably a late class finishing up. You remember what your daddy said, he said. The night before your first regional. You were so nervous you couldn't eat dinner. She did remember. She'd been 13. She'd stood in the kitchen and looked at the food on her plate and felt like the floor was moving. Her father had sat across from her and said, "Don't fight the fight they want. Fight the fight you're ready for." Yeah, she said. I remember. So what fight are you ready for? She thought about it. Not this one, she said. Not yet. Then what are you waiting for? I'm building something, she said. It takes time to build, right? How much time? I don't know yet, but I'll know when I have enough. Silence. The comfortable kind. Ray Dunbar was a man who understood the difference between waiting out of fear and waiting out of strategy. He'd taught her that distinction. He knew which one she was doing. 29 days, he said. I know. You training? Every morning, evening when the gym's open, wait, on track. How's the spinning heel? Cleaner than it's been all year. Good. A pause. Your daddy ask about you? Called Sunday. He's good. Tell him I said, hey, I will. Thursday, he said, which was his way of saying goodbye. A reminder that he'd call again, that the thread would continue, that she wasn't out there completely alone. Thursday, she said. She put the phone down. She sat at her desk for a moment. Outside the window, the campus was lit up in the evening. Students crossing the quad in small clusters, lights in the library windows, the distant sound of a car starting in the parking lot. She picked up her highlighter, went back to the reading, Chapter 5, Power Structures in Closed Communities. The conditions under which they sustain themselves. The conditions under which they collapse. She highlighted a sentence. The structure fails when a member who does not require the resource controlled by the dominant group introduces an alternative source of authority. She looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote in the margin, small and neat, or when the dominant group makes a mistake that creates its own record. She kept reading. It was the Friday of the second week when Reagan found out about the deadline. Not from Delia, not from Ford. Not from anyone she'd spoken to directly. She found it the way she found most things, by paying attention to a room. She was in the library, second floor, in the quiet section near the periodicals that nobody used anymore. She went there to study in the afternoons because it was genuinely quiet and because the chairs were the good kind. The old wooden ones with the curved backs that Caldwell had never gotten around to replacing with the modern mesh office chairs. She was there. Shane and Pierce were 2 aisles over. They were talking at a volume that said they believed they were alone. Not loudly, but clearly. Reagan did not move. She did not make a sound. She turned a page of her book at a natural interval to not draw attention, and she listened. She caught fragments. Not everything, but enough. Conduct clause, which means one formal action, regional competition. She loses eligibility if she's suspended before, so the window is. Trent can do it. If it's public enough, in front of witnesses, she reacts and it's over. If she doesn't react, we file the report anyway and say she'd been threatening. Either way. Reagan turned another page. She breathed very slowly. In through the nose, measured the way Ray had taught her before competition. The breath that keeps the heart rate from climbing, that keeps the hands from tightening, that keeps the face from showing what the mind is doing. She understood what she'd just heard. Trent Calloway, the one Shane used as a blunt instrument, was going to engineer a public confrontation, physical if possible, designed to either provoke Reagan into responding, which would generate a conduct violation, or, if she didn't respond, to be reported as a threat anyway with a constructed witness account. Either path led to a formal disciplinary action, which triggered the conduct clause, which cost her the scholarship. The regional competition was in 27 days. The trap had to close before then, which meant it was coming soon. Maybe this week, maybe next. She kept her face completely neutral and her eyes on the page. The voices moved away. Shane and Pierce gathered their things and left. Reagan sat for another 5 minutes. Did not move. Then she took out her notebook and wrote down exactly what she'd heard. The words she could confirm. The words she was paraphrasing from partial context. She labeled it clearly. Overheard. Library. Second floor periodicals. Not confirmed. Do not rely on this alone. She was careful about that. What you overheard was not what you witnessed. Conflating the two was sloppy, and sloppy thinking cost you. She put the notebook away. She thought about Trent Calloway. She'd seen him around campus. He was 21, a junior, built wide through the shoulders. He'd played football in his first year before dropping off the team. She'd heard that from Delia. He still moved like someone who'd spent years using his body as a battering ram and hadn't quite updated the software. She thought about what he was going to do, and she thought about what she was going to do about it. Not fight back. Not in the way he was expecting. Something else. She needed a witness. A real one. Someone credible. Someone who had no stake in the outcome, who would report what they saw because that's what they did, not because she'd asked them to. She thought about the campus. The patterns of it. The places people were and weren't. She thought about the bench by the east entrance to Whitmore Hall. The one where, every morning without exception, an older man sat with a folded newspaper and a travel mug of coffee. She'd noticed him first week. He was there before she left for morning training and sometimes still there when she came back. Retired, clearly. Had the unhurried quality of someone with nowhere to be by any particular time. She'd nodded to him twice. He'd nodded back. That was the extent of it. She didn't know who he was. She thought she might need to find out. The confrontation came on Monday of the third week. Reagan had known it was coming. She'd spent the weekend training and thinking and building contingency around contingency. Ray Dunbar had a word for this. He called it seeing the mat before you're on it. The ability to anticipate the geometry of what's about to happen. To already know, before the moment arrives, where your weight needs to be. It was 11:20 in the morning, between classes. The main path from Whitmore Hall to the cafeteria, busy. The right kind of busy. Enough witnesses to matter, few enough that the chaos of a crowd wouldn't obscure what happened. Trent appeared from the left side of the path, coming out of a doorway that created a natural blind spot. Reagan had clocked this yesterday when she'd walked the route 3 times. He came in fast, not running. Walking with purpose at a pace that would produce impact if he continued on his line. Reagan kept walking, normal pace. Arms loose, he cut in hard from the left shoulder. The kind of move that reads as I wasn't watching where I was going if you're only watching casually. 6 people near enough to see. Maybe 8. Reagan felt the geometry of it in the half-second before it happened. She did not speed up. She did not dodge, obviously. She adjusted her center of gravity by 2 inches to the right. Let her shoulder roll forward at the moment of contact. Absorbed the energy of the hit and let it pass through her rather than catching it. Trent had put his full weight into the move. He'd expected to hit a fixed object. What he hit instead was something that moved with him and then wasn't there. He stumbled forward. Reagan was already 2 steps past him. She heard him catch himself. Heard the pause. Heard him recalibrate. This hadn't gone the way it was supposed to. She wasn't on the ground. She hadn't reacted. She'd just not been where he aimed. She kept walking. She did not look back. She heard him start to say something. She caught hey, and then stop. Because what was he going to say? She'd done nothing. There was nothing to point to. 8 witnesses had just seen her walk normally down a path while a bigger guy stumbled. She turned the corner toward the cafeteria. Her heart was running faster than usual. She felt it, acknowledged it, let it settle. She got her lunch, found her usual table by the window. She ate, and she thought, that was the test run. He'll be back. Next time it'll be more direct. It was Delia who solved the problem Reagan hadn't known how to solve. That same afternoon, Delia came back from a study session at the library looking thoughtful. That old man, she said, dropping her bag. The one with the newspaper. Reagan looked up. What about him? I asked the librarian who he was. Because I've been curious since week 1, and today I actually asked. Delia sat down. His name is Walter Briggs. He's 72. He was the county sheriff for 22 years. Retired in 2018. Reagan was very still. He sits on that bench every morning, Delia continued. Because his wife has a 10 o'clock pottery class in the arts building right there, and he drives her and then waits. Has done it for 2 years. The librarian says he's there every single weekday. Reagan thought about the bench, the angle of it, the sight line to the main path between Whitmore Hall and the cafeteria. That bench, she said slowly. Can he see the main path from there? Delia looked at her. Reagan, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, Reagan said, that a retired county sheriff with 22 years of law enforcement experience who sits in that spot every single weekday morning is probably very good at noticing when something on that path doesn't look right. Delia stared at her. Did something happen this morning? She asked, on the path. Yeah, what happened? Nothing I can prove. Reagan paused. Delia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you want me to go introduce myself to him?" Reagan thought about it. "Not yet," she said. "But it's good to know he's there." She took out her notebook. She wrote down, "Walter Briggs, retired sheriff, 22 years. Bench, east entrance, every weekday morning. Wife, pottery, arts building, 10 a.m. She underlined his name. Then she wrote, "Trent will try again. Public, he needs witnesses, so do I." On Wednesday of the third week, Trent tried again. This time it was the gymnasium entrance. Late afternoon, when the after-class rush was coming through, Reagan had physical conditioning, a class requirement for athletic scholarship students, that ended at 4:15, which put her in the hallway outside the gym with a crowd. Trent was waiting by the equipment room door. Ford was there too, which Reagan registered and filed. The hallway was full, maybe 30 students moving through. Trent stepped into Reagan's path. This time no pretense of accident. He stopped directly in front of her and said, loudly enough to carry, "You think you're something special, don't you?" Not a question. The students nearest them slowed. The particular human instinct toward incoming drama. Reagan stopped. She looked at Trent, measured, calm, no anger on her face. Not because she didn't feel it, but because she'd had 11 years of practice deciding what to show. "I don't know you," she said, quietly, not provocatively, just a fact. "Shane told me about you," Trent said, still loud, playing to the room. "Little scholarship girl from the middle of nowhere. Here because somebody felt sorry for you." Reagan said nothing. She was watching him, not his face. His center, the chest and hips, where movement originates before it arrives at the extremities. "Nothing to say?" he said. "No," she said. He stepped closer, forward 2 feet to his left, shifted his weight. She caught it in her peripheral vision. His arms came slightly uncrossed. A small postural change. Trent reached out. A hard shove toward Reagan's shoulder. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Reagan's weight dropped and shifted. Her right foot moved back and out to anchor. Her left shoulder turned into the force and rolled under it, redirecting rather than resisting. Trent's hand found nothing to push against. The target had moved. His own momentum carried his arm forward and slightly down. Reagan was already beside him, not in front of him. Completely untouched, the whole sequence had been silent and small. If you blinked, you might have missed the mechanics of it. What you would have seen, clearly was. Trent shoved at Reagan, and Reagan was simply not where he expected her to be. He turned. His face was going red now, not from effort. From the particular embarrassment of having committed to a move in front of 30 people and produced nothing. He took a step toward her. Voice said, "That's enough, Ford Beckett." Standing upright now. Looking at Trent, Trent stared at him. "Walk away," Ford said. Lower now, but clear. The moment stretched. Then Trent made a sound, half dismissal, half something else, and turned and walked away down the hall. The crowd began to dissolve. The specific social instinct of people who don't want to be left standing at the scene of something. Reagan looked at Ford. He looked back at her. His expression was complicated, like a man who has just done something and isn't entirely sure what it means but knows he can't undo it. "Don't thank me," he said. "I wasn't going to," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he walked away in the other direction. Reagan stood for a moment in the thinning hallway. She thought about what had just happened. Ford Beckett stepping between Trent and a further escalation. Not out of heroism. She didn't think it was that simple. Out of something she recognized. The accumulated weight of watching something wrong happen and not being able to keep telling yourself it's not your problem. She thought about how that weight eventually gets too heavy. She took out her notebook right there in the hallway and wrote down the time and what had happened. She included Ford's intervention, exactly as it happened. His words verbatim. She didn't know yet how it would matter, but things always mattered in ways you couldn't predict from where you stood. That evening she trained later than usual. The gym was empty. She had it to herself from 8 to 9:30 when the building closed. She worked combinations on the heavy bag for 40 minutes, then footwork drills. Then she stretched on the mat and looked at the ceiling and let her mind work the way it worked best. Slowly, without forcing, 24 days, she thought about what she had, what she'd documented, what she'd observed, what she'd overheard in the library, what Ford had said in American history, what Delia had found about Walter Briggs. It wasn't enough yet, not to act, not in a way that would hold, but it was building. She thought about what Ray Dunbar had said on the phone. Then what are you waiting for? She'd said she'd know when she had enough. She thought she was getting close. Trent would try a third time. He had to. He'd failed twice, and Shane needed a result before the window closed. The third attempt would be bigger, more deliberate, harder to deny, and this time, she was going to make sure Walter Briggs was exactly where he needed to be. She sat up, picked up her water bottle, drank. On the gym wall, the clock read 9:12. She looked at her training gloves on the mat next to her. The old ones, the ones that Shane Whitfield had looked at in the first week and said nothing about, but his expression had said it. Trash. The word was legible in the slight curl of the lip. This girl has nothing. She is nothing. Reagan picked the gloves up. She turned them over in her hands. 11 years. Every morning at 5, every evening that Ray Dunbar had the gym open. Every cold morning in a converted storage unit with buzzing fluorescent lights and no heat. Every tournament, every loss that made her better. Every win that reminded her why the work mattered. Her father at the kitchen table, reading the scholarship letter 3 times. Her father's voice. Your mama would have made a lot of noise about this. She put the gloves in her bag. She picked up the bag and turned off the lights. She walked out into the Kentucky night. Cool now, properly autumn, the smell of fallen leaves on the air, and crossed the campus back to Carver Hall. 24 days. She was ready. What she needed now was for Trent Calloway to try one more time. On the right path, at the right time, with the right person sitting on the right bench. She was going to make sure of it. 24 days before the regional championship, Reagan woke at 4:30, 15 minutes before her alarm. She lay in the dark and listened to the campus. The particular quiet of a college at that hour, not silent exactly. A car somewhere, the hum of the building's heating system. Delia's steady breathing from across the room. She'd been awake for a few minutes before she realized she wasn't anxious. That was worth noting. In the years she'd been competing, there was a specific feeling that arrived in the days before something significant. A low-grade electrical charge in the chest. Not fear. She'd learned to distinguish between fear and readiness a long time ago. Fear said, I don't want this. The charge said, I'm ready for this. And the readiness has nowhere to go yet. The charge was there now. She got up quietly, dressed in the dark, laced her shoes by feel. She'd done it enough times that her hands knew the sequence without her eyes needing to be involved. She looked at Delia's sleeping shape for a moment. Her roommate had a midterm today. She'd been up until midnight studying, and even then had looked at Reagan over the edge of her textbook and said, I feel like I'm about to forget everything I know. You won't, Reagan had said. How do you know? Because you've been saying things out loud in your sleep. Your brain's been reviewing while you rest. Delia had stared at her. That's either very reassuring or very disturbing. Pick whichever helps you sleep. Delia had laughed. The first real laugh Reagan had heard from her since the academic integrity complaint, and turned off her lamp. Reagan picked up her bag and went downstairs. The gym at 5 in the morning was hers. She worked for 90 minutes. Not the anxious, burn-it-out training she'd fallen into the night she found out about Delia's complaint. This was different. Precise, technical. The kind of training where you're not trying to work something out. You're putting the finishing polish on something already built. She worked the spinning heel kick until the rotation was automatic. She worked the timing of the jump back kick until she could feel the exact moment of maximum extension. She ran combinations at full speed and then at 3/4 speed, because 3/4 speed showed you where the sloppiness lived. At 6:20, she stopped, stretched, drank water. She sat cross-legged on the mat and thought about the day. Today was Thursday. Thursday was important for 2 reasons. First, Coach Dunbar would call at 8. She had things to tell him. Not everything. He'd worry about things that weren't worth worrying about yet, but enough. Second was going to talk to Walter Briggs. She'd been thinking about this for 4 days, working it from every angle. The risk of approaching him was that she'd tip her hand. If Shane found out Reagan had spoken to the retired sheriff, he might accelerate the timeline or change the approach entirely. But the risk of not approaching him was worse. If Trent made his next move and Walter happened to be looking the other way, the moment would be gone. And there might not be another one before the window closed. She needed to know if he'd seen what happened on Monday, on the main path, the first time Trent had tried. If he had, if he'd noticed, and if his instincts had flagged it, then she didn't need to explain anything. She just needed him to know that she knew he was there. Sometimes that was enough. She packed her bag, went upstairs and showered, ate breakfast in the cafeteria. She'd timed it deliberately, arriving after the main rush but before it cleared entirely, so she was visible but not performing visibility. Shane's table was occupied. Shane was there. He looked at Reagan the way he'd been looking at her for the past week, with the specific attention of someone waiting for a result that hadn't arrived yet. A machine that keeps running but whose output hasn't appeared. Reagan put her tray down at her usual table by the window, ate her eggs, read the chapter she needed for today's sociology class, didn't look at Shane's table again. At 9:15, she walked to the east entrance of Whitmore Hall. Walter Briggs was on his bench, newspaper folded in his lap, the actual printed paper, not a phone. Travel mug of coffee in his right hand. He was wearing a canvas jacket, brown, with a fleece lining, the kind of jacket that had been worn long enough to stop being a jacket and become simply part of the man. Reagan walked toward him at a natural pace, not hurrying, not hesitating. She stopped a few feet away. He looked up. He had the kind of face that a long career in law enforcement builds. Not hard exactly, just settled, like the landscape of someone who has seen a lot of things and arranged them inside himself into some kind of order. His eyes were sharp, alert without being aggressive. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" He looked at her, a brief assessment. Then he gestured to the far end of the bench. She sat, not too close. A respectful distance. "You're the girl from Carver Hall," he said. Not accusatory, just, "I've noticed you too, Reagan Holloway," she said. "Walter Briggs." He didn't extend his hand, just said the name the way people say names when they're accustomed to being known. "I know," she said. "I asked about you." That got a slight reaction. Not quite a smile, but something near it. "Did you?" "I did." She looked out at the path. "I wanted to know who was on this bench every morning, because from here you can see the main walkway between Whitmore and the cafeteria. And I wanted to know if you were the kind of person who notices things." A pause. Walter Briggs looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the walkway. "I was county sheriff for 22 years, he said. "Noticing things is what I did, I know. What are you asking me, Miss Holloway?" She looked at him directly. "Last Monday, about 11:20, there was an incident on that path. A young man, big, dark jacket, came out of the east doorway of Whitmore and intercepted me walking toward the cafeteria." Walter Briggs said nothing. He was looking at the path. "I'm asking if you saw it," she said. A long pause. "I saw something," he said carefully. "I saw a young man come out of that doorway at a pace and an angle that didn't match someone who was just trying to get somewhere. It looked like an interception." He paused. "And then I saw you walk through it like you'd been expecting it," he said, "which I found interesting." "Did you take out your phone?" she asked. He looked at her. A longer look this time. "I have a habit," he said slowly, "that I developed over 22 years. When I see something that doesn't look right, I document it. Out of instinct, mostly. My wife says I should have left the instincts in the office when I retired." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. It was not a new phone. It had a case that had been cracked and repaired with clear tape. He held it up, screen facing him, then turned it toward Reagan, a video. 48 seconds. Shot from the bench. The angle was slightly elevated, which gave it a clear view of the path without obstruction. She watched it. She saw herself walk down the path. She saw Trent come out of the doorway. She saw the trajectory of his movement. The angle made it undeniable. He was not going anywhere except toward her. She saw herself adjust and move through it. She saw him stumble, recover, pause. She saw herself continue walking without looking back. She looked up at Walter Briggs. "Is that useful to you?" he asked. "Very," she said. "You want to tell me what's going on?" She thought about it for a moment. "A student has been running a campaign to generate a conduct violation against me before a competition deadline," she said, "so that I lose my athletics scholarship. That was one attempt. There'll be another. Probably soon." "Who's the student?" "Shane Whitfield." Something moved in Walter Briggs's face. Not surprise, exactly. The specific expression of someone who hears a name and thinks, "Of course, I know that family," he said, not elaborating, just, "I know that family." In a tone that said everything without saying anything. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Reagan said. "I just wanted you to know that I know you're here. And that if something happens on that path, something that doesn't look right, I'd be grateful if you kept the same habit you've always had." Walter Briggs looked at her for a long moment. He was, she thought, running the kind of calculus that people with his experience ran, weighing what she was asking, whether it was straight. Then he picked up his newspaper. "I sit on this bench every weekday morning," he said, 9 to 10. "That's just what I do, I know," she said. "Thank you." She stood up. "Picked up her bag, Miss Holloway," he said. She looked back. "Whatever you're preparing for," he said, "prepare well." "Yes, sir," she said. She walked to class. In Dr. Gale's sociology class that Thursday, they discussed institutional power, not abstractly. Dr. Gale rarely did anything abstractly. She stood at the front of the room and asked the class to name institutions that had, at some point in American history, demonstrated the capacity to be corrupted by the influence of individual donors or political families. Students offered examples: universities, local governments, school boards. Dr. Gale nodded at each one. "And what," she asked, "is the mechanism by which that corruption typically gets exposed?" Various answers. "Journalism, whistleblowers, federal oversight." "All correct," Dr. Gale said. "But I'd offer a different primary mechanism." She paused. "Documentation. The accumulation of a record that the institution itself created. Meeting minutes, financial disclosures, disciplinary decisions, which, when laid alongside each other in sequence, tell a story that was never meant to be told." She looked around the room. "Institutions protect themselves through the assumption that no one is reading the paper trail carefully," she said. "Most of the time, that assumption is correct. People don't read board minutes. They don't cross-reference financial disclosures with disciplinary outcomes. It's tedious work. It takes time, a pause. But when someone does read it, when someone does the tedious work, the record tells the truth, even when the people who created it were trying to tell a different story." From the back corner, Shane was looking at his phone. Reagan was writing in her notebook, not the class notes. The other one, after class, she stayed behind again. Dr. Gale was gathering her notes and did not look up. "You've been building something," Reagan said. Dr. Gale stopped shuffling papers. "I've been teaching for 19 years, she said carefully. "You've also been pulling board meeting minutes," Reagan said. "Public records. I know because I've been pulling them too. And last Tuesday the librarian told me someone else had requested the same documents." Dr. Gale looked up now. She studied Reagan for a moment. "I have been a faculty member at this college for 19 years, she said. "In that time I have watched the Walsh family, and now the Whitfield family, exert influence on this institution in ways that are not consistent with the stated values of this college. 3 specific disciplinary decisions that I believe were altered due to donor pressure. I have never had enough to do anything about it, because having a belief and having a record are 2 different things." "What would you need?" Reagan asked. "A clear, documented pattern," Dr. Gale said. "Ideally something current. Something where the influence can be demonstrated in real time, not reconstructed from old files." Reagan thought about Shane's father, who was a state senator with a long reach into local things. "What if the influence was being exerted right now?" Reagan said. "Against a current student, with a timeline that can be documented." Dr. Gale looked at her steadily. "Then," she said, "the old records would have context, and context is what turns a set of facts into a story." She put her papers into her bag. "Miss Holloway," she said, "what do you need from me?" "I need you to be available," Reagan said. "Specifically, at a meeting with Dean Crawford. When the time comes." "When will that be?" "I don't know exactly." "Soon," Dr. Gale nodded once. The decisive nod of someone who has been waiting a long time to be asked. "I have 19 years of board minutes organized by academic year," she said. "I will have them ready." She walked to the door. "Thursday, Miss Holloway," she said, and for the first time there was something warm in it. The phrase had become something between them, a small shared language. "Thursday," Reagan said. It happened on Friday morning. Reagan had known it would be Friday. The week was running out and the window was closing. If Shane needed a result before the regional competition, he was running out of days to produce one. Reagan had been on the main walkway at her normal time, 8:55, between the end of her training and the beginning of her 9 o'clock class. She'd been on this path at this time every day for 3 weeks. Reliable, predictable, the thing you needed to be when you were setting up a situation rather than waiting for one. Walter Briggs was on his bench. Newspaper, travel mug, canvas jacket. He didn't look at her as she passed. She didn't look at him, but she'd confirmed he was there. She was 30 meters past his bench when Trent appeared. This time, he wasn't alone. He had 2 others with him, people she recognized from Shane's wider circle, not the inner group, but the outer layer, the ones who participated when the situation was structured enough to feel safe. This was the escalation she'd been expecting. Trent stepped into her path. The 2 others flanked wide, not aggressively, but deliberately. The geometry of pressure without overt threat, a technique she recognized that was probably instinctive rather than trained. "The human architecture of intimidation, we need to talk," Trent said. His voice was different today, less performance, more something else, something that had been wound tighter and was looking for release. "I'm going to class," Reagan said after he said. "This will take a minute. It'll have to wait." She moved to go around him. He shifted. "Blocked. I said we need to talk," he said. Louder now. She looked at him. His face, his hands, his weight distribution. She could read the intention building in his body the way Ray had taught her to read it. Not in the face where people perform, but in the hips and shoulders where they actually prepare. He was going to grab her, not a punch, not a shove. A grab, her jacket, her arm, something that he could frame as I was just trying to get her attention, while ensuring she'd either have to physically pull free, which would look like a struggle, or stand there and be held, which would give his witnesses something to describe. She saw it coming. She had made a decision, sometime in the last 48 hours, without consciously articulating it, about what she was going to do in this moment. She was not going to avoid it. Not this time. His hand came out toward her jacket lapel. In the space between his intention and his arrival, Reagan moved, her right foot planted. Her left hip turned. As her hands came up, not to strike, not to defend in any aggressive sense, but in the precise technique of a wrist control that Ray Dunbar had drilled into her so many thousands of times that it happened before she thought it. Trent's reaching hand met her forearm on the outer edge of his wrist. She rotated, applied pressure to the joint. Not painfully, she had gears on that scale that she wasn't using. Just enough. He found himself with his arm extended awkwardly outward, wrist turned at an angle that made the next logical movement painful, feet rooted, completely unable to advance. The whole thing had made no noise, no impact, no drama. From a distance, it might have looked like two people had briefly touched in passing. From Walter Briggs's bench, it would have looked exactly like what it was. Reagan held the position for 3 seconds. Then she released, stepped back, one clean step. Trent stared at her. His arm came back. He was breathing harder than he should have been. The two people who'd flanked wide were very still. "The next time you put your hands on me," Reagan said. Her voice was quiet, completely controlled. "There's a retired county sheriff sitting on that bench who's been watching this path every weekday morning for 2 years. He has a phone and a habit." She did not look at Walter's bench. She didn't need to. Trent looked. His eyes went to the bench. Came back to Reagan. "Walk away," she said. A long moment, and Trent turned. The two others followed without a word. They went back the way they'd come. Reagan stood for a moment. Then she picked up her bag, which had stayed exactly on her shoulder through all of it, and walked to class. Behind her, on the bench, Walter Briggs folded his newspaper. He looked at his phone. He'd been recording since she'd passed the bench. She called it in herself. That same afternoon, Reagan went to the dean's office and asked for a meeting with Dean Crawford, the administrative assistant, a woman named Mrs. Pell, who had the specific efficiency of someone who has managed an academic office for a long time, looked at her over reading glasses. "Is this urgent?" "Yes," Reagan said. "Monday morning? Today, if possible. Or tomorrow." Mrs. Pell looked at the calendar. "Tomorrow at 2. 15 minutes, thank you," Reagan said. "I'll also need Dr. Norma Gale to be there if she's available. And I'm going to ask Mr. Walter Briggs. He's not a college employee, but he's a relevant witness." Mrs. Pell looked at her for a moment. "I'll let Dean Crawford know." Reagan nodded. "Thank you." She sent a text to Dr. Gale. Then she walked to Walter's bench. He was still there, his wife's pottery class having run long, and asked him directly. He said yes without hesitating. Then she called Coach Dunbar. "Dunbar, it's Reagan. It's Thursday." A pause. "You're calling early. Something happened today, and something else is about to happen tomorrow. I wanted you to know the shape of it," she told him. "All of it this time. The whole sequence. Trent, Walter Briggs, Dr. Gale, what she'd documented over 3 weeks." Ray Dunbar listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a silence. "The meeting's tomorrow," he said. 2 o'clock. "You want me there?" She thought about it. "Not for the meeting," she said. "But I might need you after." "I'll be there," he said. No elaboration. Just, "I'll be there." The way he'd shown up at every tournament, every qualifier, every morning at 5 when the gym opened. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. And she heard in his voice something she recognized as the closest Ray Dunbar came to emotion in a phone call. "Reagan? Yeah, you did this right," he said. "Every step. You did it right." She looked out her dorm window. The evening coming down on Kentucky. The hills going dark at the edges. "I learned from you," she said. "You learned from yourself," he said. "I just gave you a gym." The meeting was at 2. Reagan arrived at 1:55. Dr. Gale was already there. She had a document folder, thick, organized with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this particular use of it for a long time. She had printed and tabbed everything. The board minutes going back 5 years. 3 specific instances where disciplinary decisions had been made in ways that, when set beside the donor ledger, created a pattern that was difficult to read as coincidence. Walter Briggs arrived at 1:58. He wore a button-down shirt under his canvas jacket, the closest thing, Reagan thought, to formal wear he'd owned in years. He sat down in the chair next to Dr. Gale and nodded at her, and she nodded back. And in that exchange was the specific recognition of two people who have both spent a long time doing work that required them to watch and wait and not act before the moment was right. Dean Crawford arrived at 2 o'clock precisely. He was a careful man. Reagan had read him that way from the beginning, and nothing had changed her assessment. Not cruel, not corrupt in any overt sense, but careful. Careful of the institution, careful of the relationships that sustained it, careful for the Walsh family, and before them the Whitfield family, whose money had made things possible that would not otherwise have been possible. He sat down and looked at the three people across from him. His expression said, "I was expecting a student. I was not expecting whatever this is." "Miss Holloway," he said, "I understand you requested this meeting." "Yes," she said. "Thank you for seeing us." She opened her notebook. The small one, 3 weeks of documentation, precise and dated. "Over the past 22 days," she said, "I've been the target of a systematic campaign designed to generate a conduct violation against me before the regional athletic competition on November 14th. I'd like to walk you through the documented record." She walked him through it, not emotionally, not dramatically, in order. Dates, times, witnesses, exact words where she had them, paraphrases clearly labeled as such, the cafeteria, the rumors, the academic integrity complaint against Delia, the incident on the main path on Monday, the hallway outside the gym on Wednesday. And Friday morning, she put her notebook down and looked at Walter Briggs. Walter took out his phone. He'd already set the video up. He pressed play and set the phone on the table facing Dean Crawford. The video was 47 seconds, shot from the bench, clear and unobstructed. Trent's approach was unambiguous. The angle, the speed, the geometry of it. There was no reading this as an accident. And at the end, after Reagan had controlled his wrist and released, and he'd walked away, you could see him look at the bench, look directly at Walter's camera. He'd known he was on video, and he'd walked away anyway, because there was nothing else to do. Dean Crawford watched the video. His face was still. He looked up. "Who is this gentleman?" he said, meaning Walter. "Walter Briggs," Walter said. "County sheriff, retired. 22 years. My wife takes pottery on weekdays. I sit on that bench while she's in class." "Have done it for 2 years." Crawford looked at him. "And you recorded this voluntarily?" "Instinct," Walter said simply. 22 years of it. Something looks wrong, you document it. Old habit. Never quite left." Crawford was quiet. Then Dr. Gale placed her folder on the table. She explained it the way she'd explained things in 19 years of teaching. Clearly, without editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight. 3 instances. 3 decisions. The pattern in the record. "I want to be clear," she said, "that I am not making accusations. I am presenting a sequence of documented facts and noting that they form a pattern that this institution should examine. Particularly in light of the current situation." Crawford looked at the folder. "He didn't open it, Patricia," he said. He knew Dr. Gale by her first name. 19 years, Robert," she said. A long pause. "This is a serious presentation," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked at Reagan. "Miss Holloway, you're aware that making unfounded allegations against another student—" "Everything in that notebook is documented," Reagan said. "Dated, witnessed, or on record. The one thing I overheard in the library I labeled as unconfirmed and have not relied on in this presentation. What I've brought you is what I can prove." Crawford was quiet for a moment. "The student named in the video," he said. "Trent Calloway." "Yes. And you're suggesting this connects to—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Reagan said. "I'm showing you what happened, and when it happened, and asking you to apply your policies consistently. The same policies that were applied to the complaint made against my roommate. The same policies that I expect to apply to me. Equally," the word equally sat in the room. Crawford looked at Dr. Gale. Dr. Gale looked back at him with 19 years of patience. "I'll need to review this material," Crawford said. "Of course," Reagan said. "I have a copy of the notebook documentation for your office. Dr. Gale has copies of the board records. Mr. Briggs is willing to provide a written statement." She had prepared for this. She had 3 sealed envelopes in her bag. She placed them on the table. Crawford looked at them. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Calloway," he said. "Understood," Reagan said. "And with—" he paused. "With whoever filed the complaints against me," Reagan said. "Yes." "I'd expect that." Crawford looked at her across the table, and in his face, she watched it carefully. Something shifted. The calculation of a man who has been balancing relationships against principles for a long time, and who is now being shown, clearly and without drama, exactly what that balancing has cost. "I'll be in touch by Monday," he said. "The competition is in 23 days, Reagan said. "I'd appreciate movement before then." "Understood," he said. The meeting was over. The week after the meeting, two things happened that Reagan had not planned. The first came from Mrs. Pell, the administrative assistant who had scheduled the meeting with Dean Crawford. She called Reagan's cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon. "Professional, precise, Ms. Holloway. I want you to know that Dean Crawford's office received a phone call on the Monday before your meeting from Senator Whitfield's office, requesting that a current student matter be, and I'm reading from the call log, handled with appropriate discretion given the family's long-standing relationship with the institution." Reagan was quiet. "All calls to the dean's office go through the main college line," Mrs. Pell continued. "Per state public records law, those calls are logged. The log is part of the institutional record." Another pause. "I've worked in this office for 16 years, Mrs. Pell said. "I've seen a lot of calls like that one." "I thought someone should know the log existed," Reagan said. "Thank you, Mrs. Pell." "I didn't do anything," Mrs. Pell said. "I just answered a phone call." Same as always. She hung up. Reagan sat with that for a long moment. Senator Whitfield had called the dean's office through the official college line. Not a private call. Not a favor asked over dinner. A call that went through the switchboard and into the log because he had been so certain for so long that the log would never matter that it had never occurred to him to be careful about it. The second thing came through the audit. When the Independent Review Board subpoenaed the college's internal communications as part of the scholarship decision audit, they found, among other records, a series of emails sent through Caldwell College's institutional email system between Shane Whitfield's student account and Trent Calloway's, dated across the previous 3 weeks. Specific, detailed, coordinated. Shane had used his college email, the system he'd used since freshman orientation, the one that existed on the college's servers, the one the institution owned. He had never thought about that. He had never needed to think about it. Nobody had ever looked before. Reagan, when she heard this, thought about something Dr. Gale had said in week 1. Institutions protect themselves through the assumption that no one is reading the paper trail carefully. That assumption ran both directions. Shane found her on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the competition. Reagan was crossing the quad alone. The November sky was that specific gray-white that comes before cold weather, not threatening, just definitive. The leaves mostly down now. The campus stripped to its bones. Shane came from the direction of the administration building. He wasn't with anyone. No Pierce, no Derek. Just himself, in a coat that was still cashmere but somehow looked different now, like clothing worn by a person rather than an image. He fell into step beside Reagan without asking. They walked for a few seconds in silence, then Shane said, "The emails." Reagan said nothing. "I didn't think about the servers," Shane said. Not angry, not performing, just stating a fact about himself. "I never thought about it, I know," Reagan said. "Did you know that I'd use them?" Reagan considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "I didn't plan for that. I just knew that people who've never had to be careful usually aren't." Shane was quiet for a moment. They kept walking. The quad was mostly empty. A few students in the distance, moving between buildings, not paying attention to two people walking. "I don't understand you," Shane said finally. "You had enough to come after me in week 2. The video, the notebook, the stuff Ford told you. I had enough to defend myself," Reagan said. "That's different from coming after someone. What's the difference?" Reagan stopped walking. She turned and looked at Shane directly, the full, clear, unhurried attention she'd given him in that cafeteria on the first day. The look that had 3 weeks ago unsettled Shane precisely because it didn't contain what he expected. It still didn't contain what he expected. "I wasn't trying to destroy you," Reagan said. "I was trying to stop you, and I wanted to stop you in a way that would actually hold, not just for me, for the next person you decided to do this to, and the one after that." She paused. "You've been doing this for 2 years," she said, "and it worked every time because nobody built a record. They just tried to survive you one incident at a time and eventually left. I wasn't going to leave, so I built the record." Shane looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not the careful pleasantness of the cashmere sweater guy in the cafeteria. Not anger, not calculation. Something underneath all of that. Something that had been there a long time and hadn't had a name put to it. "There's going to be a conduct hearing," Shane said. "I know, my father is." He stopped. "I know," Reagan said. "That's between you and the board." Another silence. The November wind moved across the quad. Dead leaves skittered across the path. Shane looked down at Reagan's bag, at the old training gloves tied to the outside. He looked at them for a moment, really looked. The way you look at something when you're finally willing to see it. Those gloves, he said. I noticed them. The first day, I know, Reagan said. I thought. Shane stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I know what you thought, Reagan said. That's all right. She picked up her bag. Whatever happens next, Reagan said, is yours to figure out. Not mine. She walked away. She didn't look back. Behind her, on the quad, Shane Whitfield stood alone in the November gray and watched her go. And for the first time in a very long time, there was nobody nearby waiting to take a cue from his expression. No one watching to see what he'd do next. No architecture of observation and approval surrounding him. Just a young man standing on a campus, alone with what he'd done and what it had cost. What he did with that was his own business. The results came in pieces, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment. That was not how institutions worked. And Reagan had never expected it to be. On Monday, Delia's academic integrity case was formally closed. Insufficient evidence, which was the official language, for there was never any evidence at all. The scholarship hold was lifted. Delia got the email at 11:15 in the morning and came back to the room at lunchtime and sat down on her bed and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "It's over?" "That part," Reagan said. Delia looked at her. "How did you do that?" "I didn't," Reagan said. "You had 8 versions of your paper with timestamps going back 3 days. That's what did it, Reagan. You saved your drafts. I just made sure someone looked at them." Delia was quiet. "Thank you," she said. Don't tell me not to thank you," Delia said. "I know you're going to say that. I'm thanking you anyway." Reagan let it sit. "You're welcome," she said. On Wednesday, Trent Calloway was called to the dean's office. Reagan didn't know the specifics of what happened in that room. She hadn't asked to know. What she knew was what Walter Briggs told her when she passed his bench Thursday morning. He'd submitted his written statement Tuesday afternoon and received a confirmation receipt from the college administration. 22 years, he said, when she stopped by the bench. "I wrote a lot of statements. This one felt good to write," she nodded. "How's the preparation going?" he asked. 18 days, she said. "You going to win?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm going to be ready," she said. "That's what I can control." He nodded at that. The specific nod of someone who has heard a lot of promises and can tell the difference between one that's real and one that isn't. "My wife wants to know," he said, "if you'd like to come to dinner sometime. She says anyone who knows how to wait that long deserves a home-cooked meal." Reagan looked at him. Something moved in her chest. The specific warmth of being seen by someone who has no reason to see you except that they chose to look. "I'd like that very much," she said. "Sunday," he said. 6 o'clock. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs." "Walter," he said. "Walter," she said. On Thursday, Ford Beckett found her in the library. He sat down across from her without asking, but with a diffidence that was different from his previous manner. As though the question of whether he had the right to sit had occurred to him, and he decided to risk the answer. "Trent's been suspended," he said. "I know," she said. 1 full year, she nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Shane's not. He didn't get anything formal. But Crawford talked to him, and his father's been. There's an audit happening of the scholarship decisions. Someone filed a public records request." Reagan said nothing. She had filed the public records request. She'd done it the day after the meeting with Crawford through the state's standard process, a matter of public record. Anyone could have done it. Ford looked at her. "That was you." "It's a public records request," Reagan said. "Submitted through proper channels." A pause. "Is he going to be okay?" he asked. And in his voice was something complicated, the emotion of someone who has spent time close to a person who has done real harm and is trying to sort out what they feel about that. Reagan thought about it carefully. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's up to him." Ford looked at the table. "For what it's worth," he said. "What you did, the whole thing, you didn't come after him. You just built a wall." "I wasn't trying to destroy him," Reagan said. "I was trying to stop him. There's a difference." He looked up. "Yeah," he said. "I see that now." He stood up, picked up his bag. "American history," he said. "Wednesday. I'm going to sit in the 3rd row. Just so you know." He left. Reagan watched him go. She thought about what it cost someone to move from one side of something to another. The weight of it. The way it changed your relationship to a version of yourself that had stood still while something wrong was happening. She didn't think Ford Beckett was a good person who'd made bad choices. She thought he was an ordinary person who'd made ordinary choices in the direction of his own comfort. and who was now beginning the longer and more difficult process of figuring out what he actually believed. That was not nothing. She went back to her reading. The Saturday before the competition, Coach Ray Dunbar drove up from Harlan County. He didn't announce it. He texted when he was pulling into the parking lot. Here, Reagan met him outside Carver Hall. He was driving the same truck he'd been driving for 12 years. A blue Ford F-150 with a dent in the passenger door that had been there since she was 10 years old and had never been fixed because, as Ray had once said, the truck runs fine and the dent doesn't bother anybody who matters. He got out. He was 61 years old, with the particular build of someone who had spent 4 decades in a gym. Not for show, not for vanity, but because it was simply what he did. His hair had gone fully gray in the last 2 years. He had lines around his eyes that weren't there when Reagan had first walked into his storage unit gym at 7 years old. He looked at her for a moment. "You look good," he said. "I feel ready," she said. "You look ready." He glanced up at the campus. "This place been okay to you?" She thought about that question, what it meant and what it actually asked. "It's been honest," she said. In its way, he nodded. That was enough. They walked to the gym. He watched her run through her full competition sequence, the patterns and combinations she'd built for this specific tournament, the techniques she'd polished over the last 6 weeks. He said almost nothing, just watched, the way he'd always watched, with the absolute attention of someone for whom this was the only thing in the room. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "The spinning heel is the best I've ever seen it." Coming from Ray Dunbar, that was an aria. The footwork reset after the jump back, half a beat slow. "Fix that before Friday, I know," she said. "I felt it. Good. You feel it. You can fix it." He drove back that evening. Before he left, he stood by the truck and looked at her. "Your daddy's going to be in the stands?" "Friday," he said. She looked at him. "He drove down this week," Ray said, "staying with his cousin in Lexington." He didn't want to make a fuss about it. She felt something happen in her chest, something that had been held carefully for a long time, in the way you hold things that are too large and too important to look at directly. Her father. 11 hours on a Greyhound, paper bag sandwich. A scholarship letter read 3 times and folded very carefully. Her father in the stands on Friday. "He didn't tell me," she said. "He didn't want you thinking about it while you were preparing," Ray said. "He thought it might distract you." "It won't distract me, I know." Ray opened the truck door. But he's 73 years old with a bad back who drove 4 hours to watch his daughter compete. "So whether it distracts you or not, I thought you should know." He got in the truck. Reagan stood in the parking lot and watched him go. The autumn dark had come down fully now. The campus lit up warm around her. Someone was playing music somewhere in the dorms. Too distant to identify, just a rhythm carried on the night air. She thought about her father at the kitchen table. The scholarship letter. Your mama would have made a lot of noise about this. She thought about her mother singing on Sunday mornings. The full-throated happiness that made the house feel bigger. She thought about a 7-year-old girl walking into a converted storage unit with buzzing fluorescent lights, handed a pair of training gloves too large for her hands, looking at a man who would spend the next 11 years teaching her that the strongest thing you can do is wait until you're ready. She looked down at her hands. The old gloves were in her bag. She never trained with anything else. The regional championship was on a Friday. Reagan woke at 4:30, lay in the dark, let the charge in her chest be exactly what it was. Not anxiety, not fear. Just readiness with nowhere to go yet. Delia was asleep. Her houseplants lined the windowsill in the early dark. Reagan dressed quietly. Went downstairs, did not go to the gym. She'd learned, over 17 tournaments, that the morning of competition was not for training. It was for stillness, for letting everything she'd built settle into place without disturbing it. She sat in the common room with a coffee and her notebook. Not the documentation one, her regular notebook. She read what she'd written in the first week, the first day, the parking lot in the early mist, reading the campus. She read the notes from Dr. Gale's first class. Discomfort is where learning lives. She thought about everything the past 23 days had taught her that had nothing to do with Taekwondo, that an institution's own records are the most honest thing it produces, that a retired sheriff on a park bench sees more than anyone gives him credit for, that the person closest to you is both your greatest vulnerability and your greatest strength, and those are not separable. That patience, real patience, the kind that holds its shape under pressure, is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision, made again and again, to act from what you know rather than what you feel. Ray Dunbar had given her the gym. Her father had given her the reason. And somewhere in the last 3 weeks, in a cafeteria and a classroom, and a library and a bench by the east entrance of Whitmore Hall. She had used both. She stood on the mat at 11:47 that Friday morning. The gymnasium at the Eastern Kentucky Regional Athletic Center was large and loud. Bleachers on 3 sides, families, coaches, students, the specific layered noise of a competitive venue. Everyone's energy bouncing off the walls and combining into something that had its own texture. She'd found her father in the stands before she went to warm up. He was sitting in the 3rd row. He'd worn his good flannel shirt, the one he kept for occasions. His hands were on his knees and he was watching the mat with the focused attention of someone who had learned, over years of watching his daughter compete, exactly what to look for. When he saw her looking, he raised one hand, not waving. "Just, I'm here." She raised one hand back. "Just, I know." Ray Dunbar stood by the coach's area, arms crossed, face still, already watching the mat, already reading the geometry of the space. The match began. What followed was 4 minutes and 32 seconds that she would not be able to fully describe afterward. Not because it was chaotic, it was the opposite of chaotic. But because the experience of competing at this level, when you are genuinely prepared, is not a thing that translates well into language. It is entirely physical, entirely present. There is no past and no future. There is only the mat and the opponent in the next half second. She did not win because of the spinning heel kick, though it landed cleanly in the 3rd round and scored. She did not win because of the jump back kick, though the footwork reset was correct. She'd fixed the half-beat issue in the last 3 days. She won because of 11 years of 5 a.m. mornings in a storage unit with no heat. Because of a father who made a paper bag sandwich at 4 a.m. and never once sat at a kitchen table and said life wasn't fair. Because of a coach who gave her the most important gift anyone had ever given her, which was not technique, but the understanding that the work itself was the point. That what you built in the long, unglamorous middle of preparation was who you actually were. The final score was called. She stood on the mat and heard it. And for the first time in 23 days, for the first time since a parking lot in the early morning mist, when she'd stood at the edge of something new and read it the way Ray had taught her to read a room, she let herself feel all of it, not just the win, all of it, the cafeteria and the orange juice. The notebook with its precise dates and times. Walter Briggs and his phone and his 22 years of instinct. Norma Gale and her folder of board minutes and the summer of 1983. And what you learn when you do the work that no one else wants to do. Delia in a robe and slippers at 5 in the morning. Watching through a door. Ford Beckett, moving from one side of something to another. Her father in his good flannel shirt, 3rd row, one hand raised. She stood on the podium. The old training gloves were in her bag at the side of the mat. She could see them from where she stood, the bag unzipped, the gloves visible at the top. The referee raised her hand. In the stands, her father did not cheer loudly. He was not a man who made a lot of noise, but she could see him, could pick him out from across the gymnasium the way you can always find the person who matters. And he was nodding slowly. The small, deep nod of a man who is not surprised, but is profoundly, quietly, completely glad. She thought, your mama would have made a lot of noise about this. She thought, I know, Dad. I know she would have. She looked down at the podium beneath her feet. She looked at the gloves in her bag, 50 cents at a yard sale. Gray where the black had faded, stitched and re-stitched. 11 years of 5 a.m., 11 years of Ray Dunbar saying, again, once more, you feel it, you can fix it. Trash, someone had thought. She looked around the gymnasium, at her father, at Ray, at the mat where she'd just stood and been exactly who she'd spent her whole life becoming. There were things that looked like nothing. There were things that looked like nothing and were everything. She had known that her whole life. The girl from Harlan County had always known that. She just hadn't had a stage to show it on yet. Now she did. 3 weeks after the competition, Dr. Gale asked Reagan to stay after sociology class. The room had emptied out. The autumn light was coming through the windows at a low angle now. They were past the equinox, the days going short, the Kentucky hills beginning to show their winter colors. Dr. Gale sat across from her. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want to tell it to you directly, because I think you're a person who prefers that. Yes, Reagan said. The independent audit of scholarship decisions has been formally initiated by the board. The records I provided were included in the evidence package. This will take time. These things always take time. But it is happening, she paused. I want you to understand what that means. Because of the documentation you built over 22 days, there is now a formal process that may protect students at this institution for years after you graduate. Students who will never know your name, who will never know what you did. Reagan looked at her. That's the thing about doing the right thing carefully, Dr. Gale said. It tends to outlast the moment. The effects go further than you can see from where you're standing. Reagan was quiet for a moment. You told me to document everything, she said. I did, first week. After the cafeteria, I know when I said it, I was already going to. But it helped to hear it. Dr. Gale looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has spent 19 years teaching and knows. Not hopes, knows, when something real has happened. Thursday, Miss Holloway, she said. Reagan picked up her bag. The old training gloves were tied to the outside, where they'd always been. The Velcro re-sewn. The knuckle padding split on the left. Thursday, she said. She walked out into the Kentucky afternoon. The hills were going gold and brown at the edges. The air had the particular clarity of late autumn, everything sharp and still and very present. She had 17 days until her next training cycle began. She had a paper due in Dr. Gale's class. She had dinner at Walter Briggs's house on Sunday. She realized, walking across the campus in the November light, something she had arrived here 23 days ago, quietly hoping for and not quite believing she'd find. Not a championship. She'd had those before. Something else. A place. A few people who'd seen her clearly and chosen to stand beside her. The kind of thing that, in a town where most maps didn't bother with your name, was harder to find than any medal, and harder to lose, once you had it. She walked toward Carver Hall. She had work to do.